Hey y'all, it's Bryan Warhurst here. I'm with Jeremy Dean. He's over there at Fairway Mortgage. I'm with Keller Williams, the Impact Group, and he's with Jeremy Dean, the Dean team. So we wanted to start this video, just kind of give you guys our knowledge, in the real estate market, in the lending world, and our overall thoughts on everything, opinions, and a lot of facts as well, and to just be real with y'all. So I'm gonna leave the floor to Jeremy for a second here.
Cool. Yeah, we're excited. We're in it every day, so we see things that we think a lot of like friends or people in our same age group could probably benefit from. And that's the goal of taking these videos, is to kind of tell you guys firsthand in the trenches what we're finding as issues, what we're finding as things that could probably help you in a situation to buy a house or hurt you, and really just throwing it out there. That's our goal.
Yeah. So today we really wanted to talk about first-time home buyers, different game plans that we've seen, our clients use, that we've used personally, kind of go through a whole spectrum of what buying a house looks like and how having backup plans is so important, when going into such a big investment, because it's a huge investment. I mean, Jeremy can tell you, the numbers. I can tell you what it is, as far as selling and big investment. So I'll start off with asking Jeremy, as a first-time home buyer, what is super important to know before getting into the situation?
A lot of people need to do like an at-home financial wellness check first. I would say that's the first step. And to do an at-home financial wellness check, it's super simple. You just want to do three things. First thing you want to do is a monthly budget. And the problem with a monthly budget, it's kind of like working out. People do it, start it for 3 weeks, and then it fiddles out.
Yeah.
So you got to make a budget, stick to it, so you understand what your expendable income is. The second thing that you're going to want to do is track and monitor your credit score.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't know where their credit score is or what affects your credit score. You can go to Experian or any of those online websites and figure out where your score is currently at. And there's a few simple ways to improve your credit score. And the last thing that you're going to want to do is have a firm savings plan. That's the biggest thing. So I live by the 50-30-20 rule. 50-30-20 is 50% of my money every month goes towards things I need to have or need to do. 30% of that money is going to go towards things that I want to have or want to do, because quality of life matters. The last 20 always goes to savings.
Right.
So every dollar I make, I'm saving 20 cents regardless. I'm not touching that money. If you can start out with those three things and have a pretty good discipline on those three things, after a month or two getting in the flow of that, then I think it's time to start looking to buy a house.
Yeah, no, totally. And I'll tell you, for credit, I use Credit Karma. You can use Experian, any of those things. And another thing we'll talk about a little bit today is you don't have a lot of people have this idea of putting 20% down or having this large sum of money to go buy a house. That's not necessarily the case. And I see it all the time in my business. I mean, there's down payment assistance programs as little as 3.5% down on FHA loans. So you don't need this large sum. If I had my best friend come up to me and be like, hey, I want to buy a house, I'm looking at maybe spending $350, let's say, as an example. I'd probably tell him to be comfortable, have 15 grand ready. If we use all of it, great. If we don't use all of it, even better. Now, when I tell my friends that, or even a client, I want to make sure they at least have 5 grand sitting outside of that. You always need that emergency fund. When buying a house, heck, things happen when you buy a house. You have to maintain them. So just having an idea of that and knowing, hey, you don't need 50 grand to go buy a house. You just don't. And it's such a big investment that it's going to be appreciating, and that's a cool thing to see.
Yeah. So we talk about emergency number. So emergency number is like, if I itemize line by line everything I need to survive on a monthly basis, my rent, my food, my gas, those things that are like absolute essentials, I need to have 3 to 6 months of that in my account at all times, in case for some reason I lost my job or something unforeseen were to happen.
Totally. So when we're talking about all of this, buying a house, I mentioned backup plan. So I'm going to ask Jeremy, what would you say is a good backup plan if, let's just say I'm a consumer, I'm a little scared about buying a house. It is a lot of money. It's a huge investment. What are some backup plans that you've seen clients use, you've implemented, in the business, as far as knowing, hey, I don't know if I'm going to move in a year, maybe I'm only going to be here 2 years, but I'm financially stable. I want to, buy a house. It's an investment. What would you say some good backup plans are?
That's a great question. In my opinion, and I might be a little bit biased, but I think renting is the backup plan, because, rent is 100% interest, right? So buying a house should always be plan number one. we were talking about this earlier. You know, the Federal Reserve and NAR, which is the National Association of Realtors, just came out with statistical data showing that on average, home buyers or homeowners are 40 times wealthier than renters. So there is backup options. Obviously, if you're telling me, hey, I may move in a year, or I'm in the military, I may get orders to go to a different town in 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
We have to take a look at your specific situation because it may be different than the next guy who's planning to live in the house for 3 to 7 years. You know, the nice part is that in San Antonio specifically, Military City, USA, lower cost of living, we're a little bit more recession proof than other surrounding cities in Texas. So in the case that you do have to move in a year or 2 years, the odds, and you can probably speak to this, but the odds of being able to sell your house in this market are higher than in some other markets.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. And, you know, we're not going to sit here and tell you if you came to Jeremy or myself, like, hey, I'm only going to be here a year. Should I buy a house and I don't plan to rent it out? I'd probably look at you and say, no, go rent for a year. Now, we say these, you know, 3 to 7 year, a lot of people come to us and they say, hey, I'm going to live in this house for 5 to 10 years. The amount of times I actually see them live in that house for 5 to 10 years, it's pretty slim actually.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you get tired of the area, maybe you want to move schools, you know, maybe you just want an upgrade. So that's where these backup plans really come into play is, hey, I was planning on being in this house for 3 years. Some unforeseen issues came up. Maybe you changed jobs. You guys want to move to a different city, whatever it might be. That's where, hey, you have to look at it. Okay, if I bought my house for 300, it's worth 325. Are we happy breaking even on selling this house right now, or do we want to rent it out and let the market appreciate that house a little bit more?
Yeah.
So just looking at all of the factors, knowing a lot of times you're not dead in the water,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because there are resources to either wait or you can sell at break even depending on how much you put down. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of where I look at if I'm buying a house. It's super scary going into it. It's not as scary once you're in it. So
yeah, I agree. And like the two are generally inverse between like renting and buying, right? So like in a market where a lot of people aren't buying, the majority of people are renting. In a market where there's not a lot of renters, the majority of people are buying. So if I own a home and I have to sell that home to qualify to purchase for another home, well, you may have the opportunity to just rent it out and have that cover your payment, right? So there's multiple opportunities. If you're in a position where you're at that house and you no longer want to be at that house and you want to move up, you could choose to rent it out to a full-time tenant. You could try and sell it. But the number one thing about being a homeowner is having that piggy bank, because that's what house equity is. House equity is a piggy bank.
Yeah. You know? And the cool thing is when you rent your house out, just so y'all know, so like as a lender, Jeremy, he runs debt to income, DTI, if you've ever heard of that, is once you have that house rented, if it's covering all your mortgage fees, he doesn't include that in your debt to income. So if you did move to a different city or you just wanted an upgrade, you can still afford what you could have afforded if you didn't own that second house. So that's what's really cool. And I want to ask Jeremy, because I know Jeremy, he owns 3 houses.
I do.
So he's done this twice already. How does that work and how have you seen that work for yourself? And give me a little bit of, you know, example numbers of how that looks like.
Yeah, so the main thing is like occupancy guidelines. So when you go to buy a house, you have to declare the occupancy for that house. So you either have primary, second home, or investment property. Primary means I'm living there, it's my homestead, it's where I spend all my time. Second home, that's like a vacation home. I spend 2-3 weeks out of the year there. Investment property is solely for the purpose of producing income. So long-term or short-term rentals. So in the terms of a primary residence, and this is how I built my real estate portfolio, was my wife and I, we went and we purchased a primary residence with 5% down, and we lived in a house for a year. In the state of Texas, occupancy requirements state that you have to live in your primary for 1 year. After that year, you're now eligible to purchase another primary residence without having to refinance that loan. So after we lived in it for a year, I went and bought a new primary, moved into it, lived in it for a year. After about another year and 3 months, with a very happy wife, continuing to move over and over, we moved into our third house, which is now what we consider to probably be a 5 to 10 year house for us. And what we did with those other 2 houses is, because we secured them as a primary, got really good terms on our mortgage, we're renting them out to long-term tenants.
Yeah. And this is what I like to call, I know everyone has a little bit of a different mindset of what a house hack is. This is what I like to call a house hack, especially for, you know, buyers that are, let's say, under 35, maybe you have 1 kid, maybe you have no kids, recently married, is every time you buy that house, have the mindset of, okay, in a year or two, I can rent this out, go buy another one, and continue doing it. That's a house hack because you're getting a primary loan. For example, I've only done this once, he's done this twice. If I go, if I'm still living in my primary, I love it. I'm in my 5-year home. If I go buy another house to rent out because I want that as an investment, the terms of the loan are much worse. I have to put 20% down, a lot of times 25% down. The rates are always going to be a little bit higher on that investment property as well. So when you go buy it as a primary, hey, I can put 5% down, not take a ton of money out of the bank, buy it, live in it for a year, go do it again. And then it's boom, I'm building a portfolio of rental houses. Mm-hmm. So, and I've seen so many of my clients do this themselves is, hey, I'm going to downgrade. I'm not going to buy that $450,000 house that I want. I'm just going to buy that, $325,000 house. I'm happy there. I'm happy with the area. And then boom, in a year, let's do it another time. And then having that mindset of looking into the future a little bit, but knowing also some unforeseen things can come up. So
yeah,
that's how I look at the house hack.
I agree. I would say too, like one thing that I hear a lot, you got to look at buying real estate and buying a house as like a vehicle, right? Because like a lot of people, especially with affordability being a little bit lower with higher interest rates, higher home prices, they find that they want to live in that $350,000 house, but they can't afford it. What they can afford right now is a $250,000 house. Mm-hmm. And those people don't want to live there because it's not everything that they want. Well, what you could do is purchase that house and use it as a vehicle to get your dream home, right? Because yep. When you buy a house, there's a few things happening. Every month when you pay your mortgage, you're paying down your loan balance, so you owe less on the house. At the same time, every month and year by year, the house is appreciating in value, so it's becoming more valuable. So when you go to sell that house in 2 to 3 years, let's say I put 5% in, let's say that 5% is $20,000 in this scenario. Well, I'm not just going to get my 5% back. I'm going to get what I paid off on my loan, and I'm also going to get back what appreciated on the house. So a lot of people use that first house as a vehicle for the down payment on a larger house, so they can still have an affordable payment.
I love that you said that, because I will say the majority of my clients, this is the route they typically take in real estate is, they buy the starter home, take the equity, sell it, take the equity out of that, go buy, that medium house that they had a dream for, and then just continue doing that until they get into that dream house.
Yep.
Now, a lot of times your dream house, let's say I'm 45, I buy what I think's the dream house. Hey, you may in 5-10 years be like, you know what? Now I want more land or whatever it might be. I want to move to a different area. It always happens. So it's not a bad problem if you're doing it and not upgrading each time, because you're appreciating year over year. And typically over a 7 to 10 year span, you can average out appreciation, at least here in San Antonio, probably to come about 5% year over year. Obviously, we've had years, heck, a couple of years ago, it was 20, 30%. Then we have years like maybe even this year, it's a little bit less. So just knowing and talking to professionals, talking to even, family members who have done this, making sure that you're financially stable to do it and you're happy with the decision, super important. So I'll ask Jeremy, right now, with our current state of the market, what are your thoughts on, the market as a whole, buying right now? I know it is a buyer's market. It's not a seller's market. What are your thoughts with, where interest rates are? I know, hey, we had a great week this week.
Yes,
but
we did.
Let's say 2 weeks back, and just the overall market.
Yeah, so it's funny because I'm going to keep referring to it that it's all situational. But like in my opinion, I do mortgages for a living. I see every walk of life come in and try to buy a house every single day. And for me, someone that's really attuned to the market, even with the interest rates being high and the sales prices being high, my wife and I are looking to acquire another property because we know the opportunity in the market right now. The opportunity in the market is that if you have a seller that is motivated to move, odds are they're going to have a little incentive to help out the buyer, right? The tough part is, and what you hear a lot of people say, especially buyers, is home prices are too high, rates are too high. I'm going to wait for things to cool down. I'm going to wait for rates to come down. I'm going to wait for home prices to drop, which they won't. But if you do wait for interest rates to drop, let's just say 1%, you've got this whole pool of buyers that are sitting on the fence waiting for these rates to drop 1%. What's going to happen as soon as that happens? You're going to have that pool of buyers flood the market, and you're going to have people doing multiple offers on houses, competing, offering over list price. It's going to be the same storm that we saw in 2020, 2021, when rates were at 2.5% or 3%. the demand, it's simple economics. The demand's just going to shoot through the roof and supply is going to remain the same, probably even dwindle off. And a house that you could buy today for 250, you're probably looking at spending an extra 20 to 30 grand on in a couple of years.
I 100% agree. And I was sitting here listening to, Jeremy, and I loved what he was saying there. And we won't be blind to the fact, we want to be very honest with all of you, is when I look at monthly payments right now, I'm like, okay, interest rates, let's say 7.58%, 7%. They're ugly to us too. Like, I'm going to be real.
Yeah.
Monthly payments are ugly. I go look at a $350,000 house, see, oh, wow. I'm just making up numbers right now. We're in Texas here, taxes. So taxes are high here. I look at it and it's like $2,700. I have to spend $2,700 to afford this house. But like Jeremy said, it's like the minute the rates dip down, let's say into the fives or even low sixes, it's like all these buyers are going to come out. You're going to have to pay more for that house. Monthly payments are going to be right around the same because that house is going to be 30, 40 grand more. So essentially what we're saying is it's never a bad time to buy with the right plan. Because right now, I'll say, I have done this with a lot of my clients right now. We're getting a ton of closing cost help.
Yep.
We're getting a lot off the list price in certain price points, and there's not buyers competing with us. So we have the ball in our court. If I walk into a house that's 399 grand, let's say I run comps and the comps show, oh, hey, it's worth 400. We're still going to get that lower unless that seller is just stubborn. Then, hey, we go find the next one at 399 and get the best deal we can, and maybe get it for 370 with 5 grand in closing costs. See it happening. Whereas, like Jeremy's saying, the minute those rates drop, it's like that 399 is now going to go for 420. And then you look at the numbers there, and it's like you're in the same boat. Yeah. So that's kind of what we're getting at there.
It's like that classic game growing up, would you rather? You'd always play with your friends. Like, would you rather spend 20 grand more on a house or spend $100 more on a payment right now? Or would you rather spend $2,000 a month in rent and it go nowhere and you waste that money, or spend $2,700, $2,800 a month on a mortgage where you're getting a return on it?
Exactly. You're going to get that return in a couple years.
Right.
And so let me ask you, I guess, let's just say I am military or I'm moving to town with a new job. Let me ask you, if I go buy a house, I go buy it in, let's say, North San Antonio. What happens if I, in a year, am like, holy cow, I'm unhappy in this city. I want to move to a different city. Didn't plan on moving. Maybe I didn't save a ton of money. What does that look like? If I were to call you or a real estate agent, what does that look like? What kind of advice would you give me?
Well, the first thing I would talk to you about is, your financial situation. So how much money you've got in the bank, how much money you're willing to spend on the next house, when you have to be out, really paint a full picture, because it's kind of like, solving a math problem backwards. Basically, you have to get all the data first, and then from that data, you kind of put together the plan that would be the most cost efficient and the most effective for the client. So especially for veterans, a lot of people don't understand that you can use your VA loan more than once, and you don't have to sell the first one. It just depends on how much eligibility you have left. But if I'm a veteran moving here and bought a $250,000 house, I can turn around, even though I still own that, and use my VA loan again to purchase another primary with zero down. So veterans, a lot of people think, oh, I use my VA, it's tied up in the house, I can't use it anymore. That's not always the case. I've had clients purchase a $250,000 house with zero down and turn around and go purchase another $450,000 with zero down. The only caveat being it has to be a primary residence.
Yeah. What's the limit on that? Isn't it $1 million?
For the VA loan? Yeah, you can go up to $1 million. It just depends on eligibility, how much eligibility. If your eligibility is tied up and you can only use partial eligibility, you may have to come in with a down payment, but that's for us to look at.
Exactly. So hearing that on my side of it, hey, if that same example I just used, in a year they call me, my job as the real estate agent is to see, okay, can they sell this house? Can we break even? Because there are fees going into selling a house. So if you can't break even, if you don't have enough money to cover the difference of selling that house because you want to get rid of it, then at that point, that's where, hey, we really need to look at rent. And a lot of times I go into an appointment like that. If someone bought a house, let's say at the high of the market in 2022, I go in with rent comps, knowing, hey, we may have to rent this house out for you to be financially secure, because selling it, sometimes you can take a loss because of fees. So we just have to look at all of those things. And that's where, hey, we don't know where we'll be in 2024. We don't know where we'll be in 2025. But at the end of the day, house prices are always going to do this. Right now, we're maybe right here, but they're going to go back here. They're going to go back here, you know. So that's kind of where we're gathering it. And there's so many different programs out there. So I'm going to ask Jeremy this right now. Tell me about some loan programs. Tell me about first-time homebuyer loan programs, you know, and some other cool programs maybe that have come out during this weird market we're in.
You know, programs are like shoe sizes. Like there's not one size fits all. There's a ton of loan programs out there, more than you can count. Yeah. So I guess there's really four main pillars to lending. I call them the four main pillars because they're the loan programs we use the most often. And it's conventional, VA, FHA, and USDA. Those loan programs pretty much fit any need for any client. First-time homebuyer programs and down payment assistance programs can be coupled with those. Mm-hmm. So they're not technically a program themselves, but they're an add-on to the program. And what they do is they basically cover the down payment for you if you're in a position where you don't have the capital to put a down payment. I've had clients close on a house and literally spend $400 or $500 to get into the house. I've had clients actually get some of their earnest money back. So they're literally
that too.
Walking into a house and they got a check written to them at closing.
Yep. For a couple grand saying, hey, you bought this house, but we're giving you money back.
Yeah.
And I want to teeter onto this point because, heck, I've been in the business some time now. He's been in the business some time now. But a lot of times, I guess, some of these programs can be misconstrued. And just kind of want to give some knowledge that I've seen. A lot of times, first-time home buyers, a lender tells them, hey, let's do, you know, this down payment assistance program. It's a grant, like Jeremy said. Now, a lot of times what's not advertised out to the public is if you don't stay in that house for 5 years, for example, it all depends on the program. You do owe that down payment back. So you're not getting free money. Now, let's just say it's a 5-year. If I live in that house for 5 years and 1 month, I do not owe that money back. Mm-hmm. So that was free money at that point. But if you called me in 3 years after buying that house, you went through a down payment assistance program, at that point in time, we have to take into account, hey, the down payment was 10 grand. We're selling this house. So 10 grand of your profit is going to have to pay back that down payment. So that's something that, you know, I think you need to have knowledge when you're going into something. And that's why I think it's so important, you know, just whoever, you know, your favorite realtor, favorite lender is, knowing their knowledge and asking the right questions. So I guess that's where I'll ask you, Jeremy, what are some really good questions for someone who maybe they don't know anything about buying a house? What would you say are some good questions to ask your preferred lender and real estate agent, you know, going into your first purchase?
You know, I feel like, at least on the lending side of things, there's like this whole second language that's been built around lending, literally, I think, for the sole purpose to confuse the consumer. But no question is a stupid question. There's acronyms in lending. There's different terminology, like Bryan mentioned, debt to income ratios. Mm-hmm. You know, we've got a bunch of things that we look at for each and every loan. So I think the better way to kind of phrase the answer to this question is to say what we look at. This way a client would know what we look at, because we look at three major things, really. Mm-hmm. There's some other small breakouts of that tree, but the three main things that we look at, it's going to be credit, assets, and income. So we look at your credit score and your trade lines, make sure you have the ability to repay debt. Do you have a good score? Do you have a good history on your trade lines? The next thing we look at is assets. So that's going to be bank statements, 401k, IRA, money market accounts, anything like that. We have to show that you have the ability to come in with the capital requirement for the house. So that would be down payment and closing costs. The last thing that we look at is income. So with employment or income, you have to have stability of income. There is this idea that you have to have 2 years of employment history, which isn't always the case. What we have to prove to the underwriter is that there's a fair case that your income is stable and expected to continue as is. So sometimes that could be a year, sometimes that could be 6 months. Right now I have 2 clients that are closing on a house, husband and wife. Both of them don't have a job yet. They both have offer letters for a job that they're set to start in 60 days after they close. So there's a lot of different variations on income, but what we have to prove to the underwriter is that you have the ability to make the monthly payment. So around those 3 things, that's where I would say center most of your questions. If you have issues with your credit score, or you don't know how to improve credit, or you don't necessarily know what weighs the most into your credit score, revolving debts, student loans, car payments, things like that, those would be good questions to ask. With assets, where's the best place to keep my money if I want to do X, Y, Z with it in the future? That's a good question to ask. With income, I've been at this job for X amount of months. I'm paid this way. Can I qualify to purchase a house? That would be a good question to ask.
Cool. While I was listening to, what's a trade line? You know, for the public, What's a trade line?
A trade line is just a fancy way to say something that's on your credit report. So if I have a credit card with Chase and I have a credit card with Wells Fargo, those are both going to be considered trade lines. If I have 2 student loans, those are each a trade line. If I have an auto loan, those are trade lines. We as lenders do not care about what the overall balance of your trade lines are. You could have $100,000 in debt. We don't care. What we go off of is the required minimum monthly payment for those liabilities.
That's a perfect way to describe it. So that's why, and I want everyone to know, calling Jeremy, calling a lender to ask all of these questions, get this information, it's completely free. Calling me as a realtor to get my advice on what to do, maybe setting out that plan. And that's our overall goal is when I meet with someone I do not know, or even a friend who's like, hey, I want to sit down and talk about it. It's just setting a plan. It's all free until you buy that house. At that point, then, the lender's getting paid. Me as the realtor is getting paid. You as a buyer currently are not paying, your real estate agent. But we love it when people call us to ask for advice, to go over these things, to get a pre-approval, go through this process. And just so you know, on my side of it, I'll say this, your credit's not hit too much. I always recommend getting pre-approved, 6 months, sometimes even a year before you buy a house, so okay, this is what I can afford. Here's what I maybe need to do to get to where I want to afford, whether it's paying off some loans or whatever it might be. So and you don't call us, 1 month before and it's like, oh, wow, I didn't know my credit was down here, or I didn't know that this auto loan was affecting me this much. Because then during that 6 month to a year period that you set yourself up for success, knowing, okay, this really isn't all that hard. In 3 months, I can do exactly what, my lender told me, and then we're ready to buy the house that we want. So
I agree. I wouldn't say that I ever got into lending with the sole purpose of lending people money. I got into lending because I consider myself a self-proclaimed finance nerd, to be honest with you. And it's like my ability to flex that muscle, have those consultations with those clients. It is a passion of mine. Just a lot of lenders you talk to, and I'm not saying they're all bad, but a lot of lenders that you talk to, their single goal is to get the transaction. Their single goal is to issue the pre-approval letter. Mm-hmm. For us, I take a consultative approach. If I find that you're spending XYZ dollars a month on high interest debt when we could be paying that off and doing something else with money or putting the money into a different account, those are the things we'll talk about. The house is obviously the main goal, but there's so many ways that you can facilitate that goal. And that's the big picture, is to take a look at everything, refine all the little parts so you can get to that goal.
Yeah. Even me as a real estate agent, I have a ton of knowledge with all of this. I still call Jeremy up on a Friday afternoon. I'm like, hey, dude, I just threw some money into this. Like, am I being stupid? And Jeremy will give me the whole rundown, because it's like we all have our, not narrow road, we have a wide road, but we stay in our lanes. Like Jeremy stays in his, I stay in mine. He'll call me for real estate questions. Like, hey, man, look at this house. Like, can you run some numbers on it for me, rental, whatever it is? Because that's what we do for a living. And everyone has that with their job. So it does not hurt to ask questions. To us, to any preferred people you have. That's what we do for a living. And like I said, a lot of it we work for free, and we actually enjoy it, funny enough. I enjoy when someone calls me and asks me a ton of questions. I'm like, oh, heck yeah.
I do too, definitely. I want to ask you a couple questions. Since you've been asking me some questions, I think it's important to ask you some. So I'm a first-time home buyer. I have no idea what real estate is. I know my parents bought houses back when, and I know it's a smart thing to do. It's a smart financial investment, but I'm literally just lost on where to go. I'm looking at houses on Zillow. I don't know who to call. What would you say as a buyer in those shoes are like the 2 or 3 most important first steps to finding a house?
Okay. So I would say, at least here in San Antonio, all cities are a little bit different. Yes, finding what you want in a house, but I'd say the first most important thing to me, and what I try and do at that first meeting, that first weekend of going to look at houses. Obviously, first step is finding out what you can afford, what you're comfortable monthly payment wise. Mm-hmm. But as far as searching for houses, what location do we want to be in? So if I have a buyer coming from out of state, I'm looking at, okay, they're sending me houses on the southeast side. They're sending me houses east side, northeast, northwest. Because the houses look good and they're all in different price points, and people ask, oh, why is this one cheaper than this one? Why is this one less expensive? This one's more. So my first overall goal is to find out what area you want to be in, because if you're looking at the east side and you have kids, you don't like those schools, that's where I'll revert to, hey, this northeast side, these schools are a little bit better, whatever it might be. Finding that area. Number 2, finding out what you need in a house. Do you need, 2.5 bathrooms? You need that half bathroom for guests. Do you need a 4th bedroom? Do you, or can a 4th bedroom, work as a study? Finding out what the needs are. And then 3, I want to find out what you want. What are all the wants you want in a house? I'll tell you, probably 9 times out of 10, no matter what price point you're in, you're not going to get every single want you want. So then my job is, after looking at houses, getting you into homes, figuring out, okay, I know you really, really want that big backyard, or you really want that huge covered patio, and then you want a huge living room, nice gourmet kitchen, whatever it might be. Okay, hey, we got a covered patio. It's not as big as we want. The yard's a little bit smaller, but hey, we got the other items. Perfect. This house works. Just knowing needs are most important. And then to me, it's area, because that's why price points are so much different when, someone who doesn't know the area, first time buying a house, doesn't know what the process looks like, doesn't know what owning a house looks like. I can promise you, most of my clients that call and say, hey, I'm unhappy, it's a lot of times not even the house. It's like, hey, we love our neighborhood, but we drive outside the neighborhood and don't like the surrounding areas. And that's my job, to show you that's the most important thing right there.
Mm-hmm.
So does that answer all your questions?
It does. The need and want thing is super important. And we've got programs that we didn't mention that you can roll some of your wants in. Like if you find a house that meets all the needs, but it doesn't have that patio or it doesn't have that pool or something like that, there's loan options to roll that into the cost.
Yeah. Hopefully that was super helpful to y'all. We plan to do this more and just kind of have, it's not really roundtable talk, but just kind of discuss, some of the knowledge that we've gained, and hopefully give y'all some of it. So, thank y'all again for watching. Jeremy and I speak a little bit about this, and hopefully it helped.
Yeah, I mean, we can reiterate all the things we know, but it's important to know what you guys want to know too. So if at any point there's a topic that you want to be covered, or something that you want us to go into a little bit more detail about too, just let us know in the comments. We'd be very happy to cover it on our next video.
Yeah, we'd love to do Q&As too. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.